Morning or evening, grace brethren and sisters, have all of back along with us here with a Temperance Awakening, and we come to the end of the road with our tobacco lectures, at least for our first set here. Of course, there'll certainly be a lot of other things that we bring about tobacco later on here, just in the early days of this ministry, as it certainly is. You know, we are here to help people with tobacco, alcohol, and pornography addictions, and so it is a ministry to help people with those things. This will end, though, at least our first set of tobacco lectures. This is the first type of teaching that we have done for this ministry. And so today will be our last tobacco lecture here. Of course, in our present, being at our present time, the one thing that we've done is bring these 19 lectures on tobacco. And of course, we will begin our alcohol lectures here after this, and a couple of months from this time when we get our things ready for that. And so today we're going to be looking at withdrawal and women and smoking. Going to be looking at those two subjects here, and of course we do have a number of things that we're going to be looking at also in the Bible with both of these things. And so hopefully everybody's ready for some help. Amen. That's what it is. That's what we're here for. Is to be a help and a blessing to people, not to, put anybody down, but, help. That's what we're all about. Amen. And so now looking at withdrawal. Withdrawal is a condition that results from the abrupt ending of a dependency-inducing drug, such as tobacco or anything else, like any other type of substance, like alcohol, heroin, cocaine, marijuana, or even something like sugar. That's something I've dealt with, unfortunately in my time, something I finally got the victory over. But, that's just like sugar, in reading this, like sugar withdrawals, people that love sweets, that's certainly similar, has a lot of similarities to nicotine and other types of drugs. And symptoms include anxiety, a bad temper, restlessness and difficulty concentrating, depression, tingling in the hands and feet, sweating, intestinal disorders, headaches, coughing, sore throats, cold-like symptoms, and a strong desire for nicotine. As with these things, we are particularly, though, talking about the withdrawal from nicotine. Of course, some of those things I know would also go for like people having sugar withdrawals and, other drugs, other substances. I mean, that can even be like an addiction, to television or video games as well. And according to the American Lung Association, 32 million of the nation's 46.2 million smokers in 2001 wanted to quit. So, that's a big majority. Probably about the only people you find that don't want to quit tobacco are young people, namely young people who are even really too young to use the products. But, the vast array of adults, certainly want to. Yet few people who try to stop smoking are successful in their attempt, or, any type of tobacco. Like we looked at in our last lecture, talking about smokeless tobacco. Smokeless tobacco has more nicotine than cigarettes does. So, often, smokeless tobacco users, they have a more difficult time quitting than even smokers do. Like the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention estimated that only 5% of smokers succeeded by just quitting cold turkey. Only about 5%, just stopping on their own. While pro-smoking advocates talk about willpower and people being too eager to call themselves victims, most of these pro-smoking advocates are just going to be the tobacco companies, or they're about the only people who are going to say that. But the question, though, of nicotine addiction, has to be considered. Yes, willpower, that's a good thing to have, namely help from the Lord, which we're going to look at. But, nicotine addiction, though, is extremely difficult. And now looking at the symptoms, whenever a person with an addiction stops taking the habit-forming substance, he or she, experiences withdrawal symptoms, as we mentioned. The human body learns to live with a certain dosage of heroin, cocaine, nicotine, or, sugar, television, like pornography, of course, something else like I mentioned. We help people hear. That's also a very big addiction, video games or whatever. And this process is called tolerance, particularly, like the bad effects of these things. Often the body needs more and more of this substance, to feel normal. That's how it is, with all of these things we mentioned. When the substance is removed, the body will suffer until it gets used to operating without the substance, whatever that might be. And of course, like with heroin, withdrawal symptoms for this can be so painful and dangerous that they become life-threatening. Nicotine withdrawal isn't this dangerous, but the symptoms taken together, can make people feel so miserable that, they're just going to start the habit again, the easy way out. Nicotine stimulates the brain's pleasure center. See, that's just like sugar, and other things. That pleasure sensor there, with dopamine. That's just like when people eat sweets, whenever they look at pornography, play video games, watch television, or whatever, that brain, that the brain's pleasure sensor, was stimulated. And then it also creates other effects that can be considered positive by the user. Particularly nicotine, that helps people concentrate, especially in noisy surroundings, that's why most people use it. It helps users deal with stress and can prevent feelings of depression. One set of withdrawal symptoms might be considered the reverse of nicotine's positive effects. Instead of managing stress with tobacco, people can become more anxious and irritable when they try to quit. They may also have a harder time concentrating and thinking. People trying to quit the nicotine habit also complain of feeling sad or depressed. Some compare their attempts to quit tobacco as similar, to losing a good friend that isn't there anymore. And those are striving to, give up the habit of tobacco often find themselves feeling hungry, as nicotine depresses the appetite, so people who quit often gain weight. About 5 pounds on average. Some women, though, may gain more. As some smokers try to quit, or chewers or dippers or whatever, they also experience a sudden loss of energy because nicotine stimulates production of the hormone epinephrine, a chemical that revs up the body. Fatigue can set in once the body's deprived of its nicotine dose. Another set of withdrawal symptoms can be attributed to the physical effects of tar, nicotine, and the other irritating chemicals in cigarette smoke. Or, maybe some other things like in smokeless tobacco, like we mentioned last lecture. Some people complain of coughs, runny noses, and even sore throats when they try to quit. While they smoke, their bodies had to create extra mucus to carry away smoke particles. That's something, that's really just there particular to cigarettes rather than smokeless tobacco because of the things, that goes in your lungs. And it takes a little time for that extra production of mucus to wind down. And often with smokers, they'll have what's called the final surge of mucus. This mucus does like spring cleaning in the body. The moist membranes in the nose and throat are getting rid of the irritants that build up during the time that the person was smoking. And the lungs are also cleaning themselves, expelling all the tar and those other chemicals that were deposited on the tissues. Other physical symptoms of withdrawal include headaches, dizziness, and tingling in the hands and feet. These symptoms show that the cardiovascular system is recovering from the effects of nicotine. See those things there? Keep that in mind when you try to quit. It's not your body, wanting nicotine. It's your body trying to recover from what you did from it. Because see, when people start smoking, chemicals in the smoke cause the blood vessels to constrict, cutting off the blood supply. They also breathe in poisonous carbon monoxide, which interferes with the oxygen supply in the blood. The result is that new smokers often feel dizzy. Then when a person stops smoking, the situation reverses itself. Blood vessels relax, allowing increased blood flow. The blood itself is more oxygenated. The body can respond to this as a rush, so that the former smoker feels lightheaded and dizzy. Worst of all, from the former smoker's point of view, are the sudden and powerful attacks of craving, for nicotine. Such flare-ups can grow in intensity until they're almost unbearable. Sometimes cravings can be associated with activities or feelings that led a person to, use tobacco. For instance, like a person who would have, like a cigarette, a dip, or a chew after dinner, they might be hit, by a craving at that time. Or a person, who felt awkward in social settings. They would use tobacco, to relax themselves, give them something to do. Or a person going through a stressful experience, like at work or, sitting in traffic or whatever else somewhere, they might use tobacco as a way to calm themselves down. At other times, cravings seem to come from nowhere or might even be triggered by almost subliminal cues. Former smokers recall cravings after smelling cigarette smoke, seeing a lit cigarette in an ashtray, or even filling a cigarette in their hands. Part of these sudden desires is physical, the need for nicotine. Part of the problem is psychological, the struggle to break a habit. People become used to having tobacco. They grow accustomed to having it, going through the rituals of it, getting out the dip, the chew, lighting up or whatever. And without these habits, many people find themselves on edge so that the smallest trigger can result in a huge attack on their willpower. And so now looking at weapons against cravings. Some people attempting to quit the habit just grit their teeth and suffer through cravings. Others, in spite of good intentions, give in and they start the habit again. Psychological techniques can be helpful to avoid cravings or deal with them, like a quit diary. Of course, this could go for I guess something non-religious, but especially though for a believer. Have like a diary, or a journal. Write down Bible verses and things about what's going on. Like write down, whenever you quit, the praying and the things that you're trying to do. You can jot down, why you used tobacco before, the mental state that you were in. And, write down, what caused you, to use it. And, try to use things like that. Of course, like me, I endorse everybody to have a prayer journal, trying to quit tobacco, or any, other bad habit, certainly, put that down, in your prayer journal. Of course, that could go, for, certainly for anybody, somebody that just wanted to have, a quit diary or a quit journal, for tobacco. Then another psychological technique is the practice of timing the length of a craving. Cravings can build an intensity until they seem unstoppable, but, like a wave, they actually do pass. That's good news. If you have that craving, it eventually goes away. Be aware of how long, you have to withstand a craving, and that certainly will help strengthen, your will to resist. Another way to deal with cravings is through nicotine replacement therapy, like we've already looked at that. Like a variety of products are now available, both over the counter and, also some things that require a physician's prescription. The nicotine patch transmits a constant low dose of nicotine to the skin to help blunt cravings while people attempt to quit. Then there's also nicotine gum, lozenges, which is like hard candy, something similar to cough drops, and also nasal spray. They're used to maintain a lower basic dose, but these treatments, though, like the lozenges, the spray, and the gum, those treatments offer the chance of taking an additional dose to defeat a craving. Like if you have a craving for it, you can pop in a piece of the gum or like a piece of the hard candy or take a spray, to knock the craving off. And the strategy behind nicotine replacement is to lower the dose of nicotine until the person is entirely free. The recommended length of the treatment is 8 to 12 weeks, though some people have remained on replacement therapy for up to 6 months trying to quit. Combined with psychological and behavioral help, nicotine replacement therapy usually contains a success rate between 25 to 33% of users remaining smoke-free 6 months after the quit date. That compares, as we said, with a success rate of just 5 to 6% for people trying to do it on willpower alone. Drug therapy is also available for some people who want to quit. Like if you go to a physician, they can prescribe you bupropion, which is a medication that was originally developed to help people against depression. That has proven effective as well in dealing with withdrawal symptoms from nicotine. It's marketed under the name Zyban, and as we said there, that does require a physician's prescription. Of course, any smoker considering any of these things here, like any of these type of therapies, even over the counter, you should really consult a physician first, as to discuss your medical condition and all, and make sure that these new therapies won't create any risk to your health. But certainly, talking there about nicotine cravings, the believer, needs to rely on the Lord. God is certainly the greatest help. Recently I had a lady, who told me that, said, I use some nicotine replacement therapies and all, but, the Lord, through prayer, is having the good Lord's help, the Holy Spirit's help, that helped me more than anything. Like it says in Psalm 23:1, very, familiar verse there. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. We know that God is our shepherd, and we don't want anything other than His holiness. We want His holiness, we want His will and His holiness certainly, does not include tobacco. And also, 1 Peter chapter 1 and verse number 16, because it is written, be ye holy, for I am holy. We have to establish and know how wrong and how wicked tobacco use is. Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. Through Christ's strength, we can get through withdrawals and make tobacco a habit of the past and make ourselves a success story. 1 John 4:4. Ye are of God, little children, and have overcome them, because greater is he that's in you than he that's in the world. The Holy Spirit that's in us, like that lady said, the Holy Spirit in us is greater than anything that the world has. James chapter 1, verses 13 and 14 says, Let no man say when he is tempted, I am tempted of God, for God cannot be tempted with evil. With evil neither tempteth he any man, but every man is tempted when he is drawn away of his own lust and enticed. Know that it isn't God tempting you, but the lust of the flesh, and believers are not to give in to the flesh. Then verse number 15 of James 1. Then when lust hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin, and sin, when it is finished, bringeth forth death. So see, if we just continue in tobacco, we're literally killing ourselves. The believer is in both ways. They're killing themselves spiritually, and they're killing themselves physically. 1 Corinthians 10:13. There hath no temptation taken you, but such as is common to man, but God is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above that ye are able, but will with the temptation also make a way to escape, that ye may be able to bear it. So we continue to rely on the Lord, as he will always make a way out of temptation. Luke 22:40. And when he was at the place, he said unto them, Pray that ye enter not into temptation. So we continue to pray that we won't fall into temptation with prayer and constant Bible study. Our heart will remain on God, and our flesh will be subdued. And then if a person continues to fall back into tobacco and can't get the victory, there's another weapon that we have. A very special, very effective weapon called fasting. And this is something that you should greatly consider, whenever trying to break habits. This is what I did, when I had a sugar addiction. You can tell I'm still a bit overweight, but I've actually lost a lot of weight. I need to lose more. But through fasting, not just fasting, from not eating for the purpose of abstaining from food, but spiritual fasting, I was able to break my sugar addiction. Like Matthew 17:21. Howbeit, Jesus speaking here, says, Howbeit this kind goeth not out, but by prayer and fasting. Some, very difficult problems, like trying to, break an addiction, trying to get over temptation requires fasting. Fasting, as we said, is a secret weapon believers have to get the victory in seemingly impossible situations. Like you can look at Esther chapter 4, the story of Esther. And one last text we're going to look at here, like in Joel chapter 2. Joel 2:12 and 13. It says, Therefore also now saith the Lord, Turn ye even to me with all your heart. See, this is a great text here, for these, like tobacco addiction. Let's turn to God first with all our heart. And with fasting and with weeping and with mourning. Let's give God all our heart. And let's be brokenhearted over the addiction that we have. Let's mourn over it. And rend your heart and not your garments, and turn unto the Lord your God, for he is gracious and merciful, slow to anger and great kindness, and repenteth him of the evil. Well, that's something that we have there that we can do to help us, when dealing with this temptation of nicotine, or anything, but now, speaking of nicotine. So let's look at cheating and repeating here, because it's difficult. Most people who try the first time, to quit nicotine, they don't. When I first tried, I never had a nicotine addiction myself, but like when I first tried to give up sweets, I caved. That's a really good comparison there. Like most people, when they try for the first time, to give up, eating unhealthy, they don't do it. And trying to quit tobacco, is difficult. But the thing to remember, though, using tobacco by trying to quit it, it not only defeats the purpose, of, nicotine replacement, if that's somebody, who's doing that spiritually, like I hope like I hope you are, or that's somebody that's also using some type of, therapy or medication, that both defeats the purpose, and it's also dangerous, of course, particularly dangerous, like we've already went over that. Like if you are using a nicotine replacement therapy, like, gum, hard candy, or like the prescription medication, adding nicotine to more nicotine is very, very, is very unhealthy. And not only that, but even, psychologically, whenever a person gives in or cheats, they usually don't quit. Like a 1996 study by Duke University found that those who cheated on the first day of quitting were overwhelmingly more likely to remain smokers 6 months later, that they're particularly being for smokers. If the success rate using the nicotine patch was, as we said, is approximately 1 in 4, the success rate for cheaters is much lower. It's only 1 in 40. People who cheat whenever they're going through, like a program to quit nicotine, their chance of quitting is very, very low. Like people who try but fail to quit, tobacco surely shouldn't, like I said, dismiss the effort. That's like anything else. Most, overweight or obese people, when they first try to lose weight, they usually give in and they eat something that they're not supposed to. Whenever they change their lifestyle or diet, whatever they're doing. Let's chalk that up to experience and said, okay, it didn't happen here. Like we mentioned that, like about having a journal, or a diary, let's keep track of things. Unfortunately, I gave in, but, let's see what we can learn from this attempt. The health benefits of smoking cessation, a 1990 report by the Surgeon General, the nation's leading public health official, noted that success in quitting smoking, requires a number of attempts. Like I said, that's, just like people who try to lose weight. Most people who try to lose weight, that requires a number of attempts. The good news for anybody trying to beat the habit is that the worst withdrawal symptoms ease within 48 to 72 hours. That's the really good news there. If you can make it 3 days, you can sort of, probably for smokeless users, as we said, that have a higher, because this right here was just for smokers. But if you, though, were using a smokeless tobacco trying to quit, chew, dip, that your symptoms would probably last a bit longer, because as we said, smokeless tobacco actually has more nicotine, than cigarettes does. And that's not, that's certainly not the case for everybody. Like with a smoker or smokeless tobacco, like everybody's different. Most people, as we said, within 2 to 3 days, those withdrawal symptoms are going to ease up. Like the running nose and everything. But for some people, that could take months. Everybody's body's different. Some people, though, are probably going to be right around that time. Some people a little bit longer. But most people, though, are going to have the symptoms ease up 2 to 3 days. I said I'd expect that to probably be 3, 4, 5 days for smokeless tobacco users. For like a NIDA, the National Institute on Drug Abuse, though, they say that most withdrawal symptoms are going to be completely gone within a few weeks, for tobacco users. So that certainly is the good news there. And so that concludes our first part here with looking at withdrawal symptoms. And now we'll get into the last thing that we're going to look at, women and smoking. We'll take this time here. If you want to hit the pause button, I'll go ahead, because we've already been going actually now like almost 24 minutes I see there. So we'll take a brief break. So like I said, take a little bit of a brief break here, and then we'll be right back with the last part of the lecture. Okay, so now we're going to get into women and smoking. Women and smoking. While women had been growing tobacco and even manufacturing tobacco products since colonial times, few women smoked until the 1920s. For generations, British and then American society frowned on the idea of female tobacco use. The strong disapproval held until well into the 1800s. In the early 1900s, tobacco companies began looking for new markets for their product. Lucky Strike and other brands of cigarettes aimed their advertising at women, and this was also like when, like the snuff, also began, for women. Race for female smoking rose not only in the 1920s, but also in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. At the height of the smoking boom in the mid-60s, almost 1/3 of women smoked. And fewer women smoke today than men. After news about the health risks of smoking became well known, smoking declined for both genders. In 1965, 51.9% of men smoked. That figure fell to 25.2% in 2001, more than a 50% drop. Among women, however, the percentage of smokers went from 33.9 to 20.7%, so it did go down, but that reduction, though, was less than what it was for men. That reduction was less than 40%, so fewer women quit smoking than men. And we're actually going to look here. A big part of that is probably because women's bodies, are different than men. Their genetics, the chemical makeup, and it's harder. We're going to look here. It's harder for females to quit smoking than males. According to a 1993 report by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, 73% of the female respondents wanted to quit or reduce smoking. However, 80% found themselves unable to do so because of nicotine withdrawal symptoms. A 2001 study for the National Institute on Drug Abuse suggests that women may associate more situations and moods with smoking, creating more triggers for cigarette cravings. The study also found that the nicotine replacement therapy was less effective because of women's body chemistry. Their body chemistry shifts more than men's due to menstruation, the monthly process among women of childbearing age in which the lining of the uterus is shed. The process is controlled by the interaction of a number of body chemicals called hormones. The American Cancer Society predicted that 173,770 new cases of lung cancer would be diagnosed in 2004, with 93,110 for males and 80,660 for women contracting the disease. In January of 2004, researchers at the Will Cornell Medical Center in New York studied computed tomography, which is CT for short. Well, most people just know of it as CT scan. But they did the CT scans for patients for structural abnormalities. The CT X-ray images showed that female smokers were 2.7 times more likely to develop lung cancer than men who smoked the same amount. In April 2004, researchers at Northwestern University in Chicago announced that lung cancer is an entirely different disease in men and women because of differences in women's body structure and growth, physical processes, and body chemistry. They also pointed out that the rate of lung cancer in women had increased 600% between 1930 and 1997, rising 60% between 1990 and 2003. The rise was termed an epidemic. And these new discoveries supplement older work by the CDC that examined data from 1995 to 1999 on life expectancy for smokers. Male smokers live 13.2 years less than non-smokers. Females live 14.5 years less than their non-smoking counterparts. See, smoking just, hurts women physically more than men. And certainly a possible reason for a woman's greater risk of developing lung cancer is likely genetic. Genes make up the instruction book for the body, regulating the growth of bodily structures and their functions. A 1995 Missouri study found a non-working gene in many women exposed to secondhand smoke. Animal studies in 2004 found that female mice lacked a functioning gene involved in the creation of a particular enzyme, a body chemical that triggers chemical reactions. The enzyme creates a reaction that kills cancerous cells. Questions still remain over whether women may lack a gene that helps clean out carcinogens or repairs genetic damage from cancer-causing chemicals in cigarette smoke. So there's not quite enough evidence yet, to prove this, but there it is, just the suggestion there possibly that women lack, that kind of enzyme. Because as we said there, like if you remember those numbers, there are fewer women that smoke than men. And in 2004, there were 93,110 males that were diagnosed, with a lung cancer, and 80,660 women. So it's almost the same. Women are lower, but just by a little bit. Even though there are a lot fewer women, that smoke than men, there are almost just as many women who get lung cancer. So as we said, smoking does a lot more to a female's body, seemingly, than a male's. And now looking at the teenage issue here. Tobacco companies are often criticized for slanting, previously were anyway, still kind of, but back, whenever they could advertise in magazines and TV and all, they were criticized for, putting their advertisements to capture young smokers. Because with the declining number of adult smokers, recruitment of replacement smokers among young people remain something that they have to do, to keep their products in circulation. And teen smoking spiked upward in the 1990s, but declined a little bit again by 2001. According to 1998 CDC figures, 1.5 million girls under the age of 18 smoke. The American Lung Association found that 63% of these young female smokers had made an attempt to quit in the year 2000. So why do teenage girls start smoking? They're in a time of life when questions of image are very important. This, very similar to a male as well. But especially for females, an important part of a girl's image is influenced by body types shown in the media. And that, previously, that included, like the commercials on television and magazines and everything. A 1999 study on this subject appeared in Pediatrics, the Journal of the American Academy of Pediatrics. Of girls between the 5th and 12th grades, 69% said that magazine pictures influenced their idea of the perfect body shape. Further, 47% of the girls wanted to lose weight because of these pictures. See, weight loss is a major reason, why females began smoking, particularly like, teenage girls, because like we just said back there when we were talking about, the withdrawals, nicotine, is like what they call a natural appetite suppressant, it knocks the appetite. It's like slim, athletic, attractive figures are the ideal, but hard to match in, reality with what teenage girls want to be. Many teenage girls smoke in the hopes it will help control their weight. While smoking does have an effect on appetite, as we just said, it's a really small benefit, though, to weight, against so many future dangers. And they're now looking at pregnancy. When a pregnant woman smokes, she exposes the fetus, the unborn infant, to a number of cancer-causing chemicals and poisons. As a fact sheet from the CDC warns, pregnant smokers face a risk of miscarrying or going into premature labor. Children born to smoking mothers have a lower birth weight. However, if the mother stops smoking when she discovers she's pregnant or 3 to 4 months into the pregnancy, the risk of having a low birth weight baby falls to the same percentage as non-smoking mothers. The CDC also warns that women who smoke while pregnant are at greater risk of losing the baby before his or her first birthday. Infants born to mothers who smoked in pregnancy are more likely to die of SIDS, SIDS, which is sudden infant death syndrome, a medical condition in which seemingly healthy babies die in their sleep. As the children of women who smoke during pregnancy grow older, they may fall behind in physical growth and intellectual development. Like Dr. Peter Fried, a Canadian researcher who has followed children whose mothers smoked in pregnancy since 1980, identified 3 measurable problems in a 1999 report. The children were slower in developing speech, they suffered from impulsive behavioral hyperactivity, and they scored slightly lower in intelligence testing. Expectant mothers are beginning to understand some of these dangers. In 2002, 17.3% of pregnant women aged 50 to 44 smoked. About 31.1% of non-pregnant women in that age group smoked. Almost 1/2 of smoking women stopped during pregnancy to protect their children. And now looking at menopause. Menopause marks the end of a woman's childbearing years. Many changes take place in the body and with the body's chemistry. Considering the large number of chemicals in cigarette smoke, it should be no surprise that smoking might affect this phase of a woman's life. A 2001 study at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston, entitled "Smoking Likely to Trigger Earlier Menopause," affirmed what many doctors had noted about female patients who smoked. The Boston researchers identified a chemical in cigarette smoke that kills eggs in the ovaries. Women are born with only a limited lifetime supply of eggs and face the onset of menopause as this supply runs low. The damage caused by cigarette smoke can go unnoticed for years until a woman suddenly has no fertile eggs left. Such unexpected premature menopause can be a problem for women who decided to wait to have children until after establishing a career or waiting for some other reason. Then also osteoporosis. Osteoporosis is a condition that concerns many older women. As women age, their bones become thinner, often breaking. A broken leg or hip can leave otherwise healthy women housebound. Studies have shown that smoking seems to accelerate the bone loss. Studies from the 1980s show that smoking works on the body to reduce estrogen, a female hormone. This reduction may play a part in the onset of early menopause as well as osteoporosis. Medical experts advise those diagnosed with osteoporosis to stop smoking. Treatment for the condition includes calcium supplements, weight-bearing exercise, drugs, and hormone replacement therapy. The health risk of smoking would seem to be enough to deter any woman from smoking, yet large numbers of young women take up the habit every year, unfortunately. A striking example what the success of advertising did years ago. Like, I do remember that as well. That was back like when I was in high school, like in the early 2000s. There were actually more female teenage smokers than males, so that might kind of sound kind of strange, but, you know, that was a fact, I know, back in the early 2000s. And now lastly, here looking at daughters of women who smoke, and we'll also mention sons as well, briefly. Children whose parents smoke have a greater chance of becoming smokers themselves. According to some sources, these young people are twice as likely to pick up the habit, like what we mentioned in previous lectures. A 1994 study from Columbia University found that daughters of women who smoked half a pack a day during pregnancy were 4 times more likely to become smokers in their teen years. In contrast to the daughters of non-smoking mothers, the researchers raised the possibility that nicotine in the expecting mother's bloodstream somehow primed the brain of the unborn baby to react to the drug later in life, so that's quite interesting there. So, like, seems as though, like even for unborn babies, like when they get older, for females that is, this mainly here just for females, there's something, like it says, in their brain, you know, that wants nicotine. Because sons, boys, didn't show the same willingness to pick up the smoking habit. The authors of the study theorized that male body chemicals called hormones somehow interfered with the effect of nicotine on unborn boys. However, though, a 1997 study by researchers from the University of Chicago and the University of Pittsburgh did find an effect of smoking during pregnancy on boys as well. The researchers were studying the backgrounds of boys being counseled for conduct disorder, a pattern of continued antisocial behavior that included fighting, lying, vandalism, and fire setting of the mothers who had smoked a half pack per day during pregnancy. 80% had sons with conduct problems. For non-smoking mothers, the rate was 50%. So it does, though, you know, really show there that if a lady smokes and she has a boy, that later on in life he's going to have behavioral issues. You know, probably, as we said, you know, because of the brain, because what nicotine does to the brain, especially, you know, to a baby, a fetus. Then another Columbia study in 1999 showed that sons whose mother smoked in pregnancy showed greater conduct problems, while daughters were 5 times more likely to fall into a substance abuse problem during their teen years. A 6-year study from the University of Chicago on disruptive boys found that sons whose mother smoked half a pack of cigarettes per day during pregnancy were exhibiting conduct problems 5 times beyond the general population by the time the boys were 7 years old. While the mechanism that sets up these behavior problems, both for males and females, has yet to be identified, the studies definitely establish that there is a problem and that it represents another long-term effect of smoking during pregnancy. So, you know, just in all ways there, you know, smoking is what we get from these lectures. It's bad on, you know, all parties involved. And certainly also, we have to believe here that any Christian would agree that women using tobacco is very contrary to the Bible's description of a godly woman, like what we find in the book of Titus in chapter number 2. And verses 3 to 5. The aged women likewise, that they be in behavior as becometh holiness, not false accusers, not giving to much wine, teachers of good things, that they may teach the young women to be sober, to love their husbands, to love their children, to be discreet, chaste, keepers at home, good, obedient to their own husbands, that the word of God be not blasphemed. So, you know, women are to be godly. They're just a godly example, you know, for younger people. You know, they are to be chaste. They are to be pure. Proverbs 31:10. Who can find a virtuous woman? For a price is far above rubies. The ladies are to be virtuous. Verse 12 of Proverbs 31. She will do him good and not evil all the days of her life. They're not to do anything evil. Proverbs 31:25 and 26. Strength and honor are her clothing, and she shall rejoice in time to come. She openeth her mouth with wisdom, and in her tongue is the law of kindness. So thanks so much for being here with us throughout all of these lectures. As we said, that concluded what we have right now on tobacco for our present time. So we're going to have a lot more later on, though, just kind of getting this ministry off the ground. But thank you so much for being with us here today, as we said as well all of the previous lectures. Certainly enjoyed going over this, very passionate about it, as you probably can see. So certainly very thankful for this ministry, for God leading us to do it. So continue praying for us. We're praying for everybody out there, as we said. Our email address is right there on YouTube, so just contact us. We can help you in any way. Want any resources or anything to help you with anything, just give us a shout, amen. And so until next time, we'll see you till then. Till the day breaks and the shadows flee away, I am Dr. Cooper, and I love you, and I appreciate you.